A coronavirus task force official told CNN issuing overly specific instructions that CDC leadership never cleared for how various types of businesses open up would be overly prescriptive and broad. The economy could use a shot in the arm after 3.2 million people filed unemployment claims last week, making for a stunning 33.5 million since mid-March.
He was an innocent man.
But the president is welcoming a development away from the pandemic after the Justice Department dropped charges against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who had pleaded guilty to lying to federal investigators. After once firing Flynn for lying to Vice President Mike Pence about the Russia investigation, the president now views Flynn as an innocent man. Mr. Trump appeared to signal what was coming last week.
When I looked at what they did to him, they tormented him, dirty cops, tormented General Flynn, because he's in the process of being exonerated.
Donald Trump ending that report from Jim Acosta. Brazil's health ministry has registered nearly 10,000 new confirmed cases of the coronavirus in the last 24-hour period. There have also been 610 COVID-19 related deaths in the past day. There are now more than 135,000 confirmed cases in Brazil and 9,000 deaths. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro says the economy is on the verge of collapse and says some states went too far in their social distancing measures. France will begin easing its lockdown next week, but the Prime Minister says restrictions will remain in Paris and northeastern regions where the threat is still high. The BBC's Lucy Williamson has more.
Here in Paris and the regions of the north, south and east, it's going to be red. That's where the virus is circulating. It's where the hospitals have seen more than 80% of their intensive care beds filled with coronavirus patients. Now, on Monday, when the lockdown starts to lift, you won't see many big differences between the two zones. But it's over the next few weeks that divisions could start to appear. You've got middle schools opening in the green zones only, and possibly in a few weeks' time, even cafes, bars and restaurants. The Prime Minister said he didn't want to think about a two-speed France, but it could be, depending on what happens in the next few weeks, that that's where this plan is heading.
Lucy Williamson there. The number of deaths from the coronavirus in Sweden has now surpassed 3,000, with 90% of victims over the age of 70. As a proportion of the population, that's a far higher figure than in neighbouring Denmark. Sweden's decision to avoid a strict lockdown drew controversy, and the country's top health official says he's not convinced it was the best option to take. However, Anders Tegnell says the country is now past the peak.
When it comes to Sweden, we continue on this curve, which appears to have been upturned, but remains on a fairly high level, which means that health authorities in many parts of the country remain under pressure. People being treated in intensive care is almost a clearer indication of what is going on. There you can see that we have had a gradual decline since several weeks back.
Norway says from Monday its entire school system should reopen, one of the first European countries to take such a step. Denmark will allow shops to reopen on Monday, but restaurants, cafes and some school classes will start back up a week later. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced essential frontline staff will get a pay boost. $4 billion will be shared among the 10 provinces, which will determine exactly who'll receive the money. Mr Trudeau says the workers, who are often in minimum wage jobs, deserve a pay rise. The CBC's David Thurton has more.
Today, the Prime Minister announced new money that could help these workers because in some cases it's been more lucrative to collect federal benefits than a paycheck.
That's why we announced a number of days ago that we wanted to move forward with a top-up to be delivered by the provinces.
Justin Trudeau says agreements in principle have been reached with all the provinces and territories worth a total of $4 billion. Ottawa will provide $3 billion and provincial and territorial governments will chip in the rest. The top-up will look different across the country, and it will be up to provincial and territorial governments to define which essential workers qualify.
David Thurton there. At least 13 people have been killed by a massive gas leak at a chemical plant in southern India, and 800 others have been taken to hospital. The leak from the LG Chem plant in Andhra Pradesh state began in the wee hours of the morning as people slept. Doctors say patients have been complaining of a burning sensation in the eyes and difficulties breathing. Officials say the leak may have been due to negligence. International tourism is facing its worst crisis since records began, with up to 1.1 billion fewer people taking trips globally this year. The UN's World Tourism Organization expects a 60 to 80% decline in international travel this year. That threatens the livelihood of up to 120 million people who directly rely on tourism for work. Intercontinental Hotels Group CEO Keith Barr told CNN the pandemic is the biggest challenge the hotel industry has ever faced, and the recovery will be very gradual.
In China, we had 190 hotels closed at the peak, and now we only have a handful closed. So we're back in business in China. Across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, we have about 50% of our hotels closed. But in the United States, we have less than 10%. And so we're about 15% hotels closed around the world, running about 25% occupancy, and that varies from market to market. Our view on recovery is that domestic businesses will recover first before big international ones. Mainstream businesses, which have a big drive component, will be part of that. It will be individual business travel and individual leisure travel before groups, meetings, conferences, and events. And international long haul will probably be the last to recover. But it will vary around the world because we have some markets where there is no virus. And so we're able to operate more normally. But where the virus exists, we're having to think through all of those things and how we're going to make sure we can deliver a good guest experience, but in a safe way for colleagues and customers. And we're going to have to innovate. I mean, this industry is going to have to innovate around how it delivers food and beverage, how it delivers the guest experience.
Intercontinental Hotels Group CEO Keith Barr speaking to CNN. The International Airlines Group, which includes British Airways, Iberia and Aer Lingus, says it's bracing for 3 tough years and doesn't anticipate a return to 2019 trading conditions until 2023. Some northern Australian towns have a well-documented problem with alcohol abuse. Efforts to control the flow of alcohol in the Kimberley region have created a thriving black market for liquor that's sold at massively inflated prices before and after local bottle shops open. Broomshire President Harold Tracy told the ABC a small number of taxi drivers are involved, not only helping problem drinkers with buying alcohol, but illegally selling liquor from their cabs too.
That sort of behaviour is irresponsible, morally wrong, and I think to profit out of someone's disadvantage is criminal.
Broomshire President Harold Tracy. Now, for some people, lockdown has been a great chance to sit on the couch and up on TV series, but for other more energetic types, they're missing out on their favourite sports and races. With large-scale events off the cards, some organisers have turned to technology to keep things up and running. Deutsche Welle's Oliver Moody explains.
Toby Schröder is getting ready to join tens of thousands of others taking part in the Wings for Life charity race. But unusually for an event like this, social distancing measures mean he'll be running all on his own. Usually, runners get a 30-minute head start before a car starts chasing them. But this year, the car is virtual. An app charts each runner's progress and tells them when they've been overtaken. It also feeds them live commentary through headphones. Toby thinks the format could catch on.
This virtual run is creative. You have live commentary and it's happening around the world. And there's a kind of gamification about the whole thing. I think there's potential for it to grow over time.
As tech becomes crucial to running events, traditional marathons are determined not to get left behind. The Dusseldorf Marathon this year, it's gone virtual. A move that race organiser and former Olympic athlete Sonja Oberum says may actually make it more popular than ever.
From the single runners, we have like 9 or 10,000. Yes, with the marathon, half marathon, yeah. And I think with the virtual run, we came close, or maybe more than the real run.
Oliver Moody with that report. And that's World Watch for today. Back to you, Mani.
Thanks, Annabelle. And that's Midday Report, Te Purongo o Te Paututanga for Friday, May the 8th. We'll be back on Monday with interviews and the latest news from Aotearoa and the world. RNZ will bring you the daily COVID-19 update in just a moment. But from me and the Midday team, kia pai tora, kia tau te mauri.
RNZ News at 1 o'clock. Kia ora koutou, I'm Cynthia Morahan. The Tourism Minister says reopening domestic travel at COVID Alert Level 2 could keep thousands of people employed. It comes after initial estimates of 200,000 job losses in the tourism sector. Calvin Davis says it was one of the first sectors to be hit, and it will be the last to come out of the shadow of COVID-19, with significant job losses still expected. But he says work is underway on a domestic tourism campaign to help soften the blow. It aims to change the way New Zealanders think about holidaying in their own country. The aviation industry says the cost of domestic flights is likely to increase, with aircraft flying with reduced passengers under Level 2. The chair of the New Zealand Aviation Coalition and the executive director of the Board of Airline Representatives, Justin Tighe-Umbers, says the number of domestic flights will increase only slightly in coming weeks. He says spacing of passengers will make it hard to run the flights economically, and that will mean the ticket prices will increase in the short term. Mr. Tighe-Umbers says it's estimated it costs an airline about 50% more for each flight, which has its middle seats empty. The head of one of the country's largest tourism operators has been made redundant. Quinton Hall has been the chief executive of Ngāi Tahu Tourism since 2014. The iwi-owned company has announced plans to cut 300 jobs and put most of its businesses into hibernation. Today, they confirmed Mr. Hall's position no longer exists. Ngāi Tahu Tourism previously announced it expects to write off the equivalent of the last 5 years of profit in the wake of COVID-19. The organisation operates several businesses, including Shot Over Jet, Franz Joseph Glacier, Hot Pool.
Kia ora, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui papaho. Greetings everybody, welcome to Friday's press conference. I will make a brief statement and take your questions after we hear from Dr. Caroline McElnay, the Director of Public Health.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. Today we are reporting 2 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. One of the new confirmed cases is linked to the St Margaret's Hospital and Rest Home in Auckland. This is a Waitemata District Health Board staff member who has been in a period of self-isolation but who has now tested positive for COVID-19 and is being cared for at North Shore Hospital. The nurse had been looking after St Margaret's Rest Home patients at Waitakere Hospital and was amongst those close contacts of another positive case announced last week. And I just want to reiterate that she has been in self-isolation since then. Affected areas at Waitakere Hospital remain closed to further admissions, and many precautions have been in place over the last week. The other confirmed case is actually a probable case that was already known to us that has now been confirmed. So that reduces the overall number of probables by 1 and brings our combined total of confirmed and probable cases, brings it to 1,490, which is an increase of 1 for the total. And just to reiterate, that is made up of 1,141 confirmed cases, and that's the number that we report to the World Health Organization, and 349 probable cases. We now have 1,347 people reported as having recovered from COVID-19, which is 90% of all confirmed and probable cases. That's gone up by 15 since yesterday. Today there are 3 people in hospital with COVID-19, 1 in Auckland City, 1 in Middlemore and 1 in North Shore Hospital. None are in ICU. We still have 16 significant clusters. There is 1 additional closed cluster. This is the cluster associated with the George Manning Rest Home in Christchurch. So that brings our number of closed significant clusters to 4. We have no additional deaths to report. Yesterday, our laboratories completed another record high number of tests, 7,812, bringing the total number of tests completed to date to 175,835. That equates to 3.5% of the population. That puts New Zealand in the top 20 countries per capita for testing. I just want to briefly talk about our testing system and how our strategy is working. From the first COVID-19 test, which was completed in New Zealand by ESR on February the 1st, we now have the capacity to perform up to 12,535 tests per day. Our laboratories, scientists and technicians have quickly adapted to fight COVID-19, and testing remains an essential part of our elimination strategy, because that's the starting point for identifying and containing the spread of the virus. Throughout level 3, and when we move into level 2 and outside our bubbles, we need to maintain our focus on ensuring that all those who have symptoms are tested, cases are isolated, and any close contacts are identified and quarantined. DHBs are submitting their updated plans to ensure that we do that. I just want to briefly mention Healthy for Life. We've had a strong push on keeping older New Zealanders safe in their bubbles, and there is a series that's available providing information for older people and how they can keep healthy in their bubbles, called Healthy for Life, and that's available on TVNZ on demand. And just lastly, reiterating that we are still in level 3, but we can prepare for level 2. But if for level 3, play it safe. We do not want a second wave. What you're doing is working in level 3, so keep working and learning from home. Keep your distance from others when outside your bubble. Parties are still not okay. Remain local and travel only within your region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. McElnay. I'm just going to say a few things today about the economic situation and then finish, as I try to do every Friday, with some sports talk for all of you. As the Prime Minister outlined yesterday, when it's safe to move to level 2, a significant amount of activity will reboot across the country. But, as Dr. McElnay has just said, New Zealanders will still have to play it safe to prevent a rebound of COVID-19. Level 2 has been designed to get as many people back to work as possible and the economy back up and running in the safest possible way. Going hard and going early on the virus means we can be more open more quickly in terms of the economy, and that has been our plan all along. We know the restrictions associated with level 4 and level 3 have had a significant impact, and I'm acutely aware of the sacrifices that have been made by many people and businesses. We are doing everything we can to mitigate this through our significant investments to support businesses, jobs and incomes. Today we've had the regular release of MSD's figures as well as the Treasury's weekly economic update, and we've also had the government's accounts for the 9 months to March published as well. The MSD numbers show job seeker support payments are up by about 40,000 people since the 20th of March. This increase represents 0.8% of our total population. For comparison, in the United States, they have had new jobless claims relating to COVID-19 of 33 million, or 10% of their population. In the latest data that we have for the week that ended the 1st of May, last Friday, we saw the smallest increase of people going on to JobSeeker since the 20th of March, with an additional 4,021 people. One interesting insight is that since the lockdown, we've seen 4,718 people who have returned from overseas and have gone on to the job seeker benefit, compared to 424 last year, a 10-fold increase. Now, while these numbers all continue to be dwarfed by the 1.72 million New Zealanders who are covered in work by the wage subsidy, we know that they will continue to grow. And we will continue to do all we can to mitigate this through our significant investments. Minister Sepuloni will release more analysis on the job seeker numbers in the near future. This will feed into our plans for rebuilding the economy, retraining workers, and our ongoing campaign to ensure we have the right support in the right place at the right time. The Treasury's weekly economic update and dashboard out today provides some interesting insights into economic activity in New Zealand measured across a range of high-frequency data. For example, electricity use on the 5th and 6th of May was higher than the same days last year after being well below 2019 levels during level 4. There are other signs of increased activity as well as we have moved from level 4 to level 3. For example, an increase of 30% of vehicle traffic, particularly among heavy vehicles, i.e. trucks, Of course, these levels of activity are still below where they would normally be. There's been a range of views on what impacts the virus will have on economies around the world, including New Zealand. Treasury scenarios show economic output could be about 75% of normal activity at level 3 and improving to 85 to 90% under level 2. New research this week from the Reserve Bank puts activity at about 80% at level 3 and improving to 91% under level 2. So while we can clearly see the benefits of moving down the alert levels, these numbers also pose a warning on that we need to keep up the amazing work that everyone in New Zealand has done to stamp out COVID-19, because we know if we move back up the alert levels, economic activity will be restrained. We do not want to yo-yo between levels. We have to stay the course. The projections and forecasts around all of this will continue to evolve, and we'll be releasing Treasury's budget forecasts on Thursday next week, which will also contain further scenarios. As I said yesterday, next week's budget will be very different to the one that I thought I would be delivering at the start of the year. We've had to move quickly to respond to the needs of our country and our people as we tackle this pandemic together. This year's budget will be just one moment on our road to recovery. Normally, the budget day represents the total of the government's economic plans and spends for the year ahead. That won't be the case this time. We will continue to work every day to get through this and thrive again. We're able to provide support that we are because of the strong position the government's books are in, particularly compared to the rest of the world. The government's accounts for the 9 months up to the end of March released today show the first signs of the COVID-19 impact. But they also show the strong position we were in going into this crisis. They reflect how we got money out the door quickly in March ahead of the lockdown to support businesses and protect jobs. The accounts show our debt as a country is low compared to the rest of the world. The way that governments measure that is by looking at net debt as a percentage of GDP or economic activity. In New Zealand, in these accounts, that number was 21.3%. By way of comparison, countries like the UK, the US and Ireland went into this situation with their debt above 75%, 90% and 40% of GDP respectively. What all of these numbers mean is that we have more room to support New Zealanders to get through this crisis. Our good position to invest in our economy and to cushion the blow was recognised by the credit agency Standard & Poor's this week when they maintained New Zealand's credit rating at AA+ with a positive outlook amid a round of credit rating downgrades in other countries. And finally, I'll just quickly put my Sports Minister hat on for a moment before we move to questions. While I know everybody, including me, is champing at the bit to get back out there and to enjoy sport, the return to sport and recreation does need to be managed carefully at all levels to ensure the health and safety of everyone involved. Sports bodies, in particular netball and rugby, are putting a lot of work into getting their professional leagues going. It will take a bit of time as they make sure they are meeting all the public health guidelines. Through Sport New Zealand and WorkSafe, we are working closely with them to make this happen as soon as possible. Community sport is also possible again at level 2. Just as for the professional, this means needing to prepare for physical distancing and good hygiene. National and regional sporting organisations are working hard to support clubs to make sure that everybody can get through this. My advice to sporting clubs is don't rush into it when and if level 2 comes into play. Get everyone in your team or your club on the same page and make sure that they're confident that the systems are in place to keep everyone safe. Happy to take your questions.
Just on the unemployment numbers, you compared us to the US. However, they don't have things like the wage subsidy scheme. That's going to roll off in the next couple of weeks after the 12 weeks expires. Have you got any projections on what New Zealand's unemployment rate is going to do once that subsidy expires?
So obviously you've seen the projections that were in the Treasury scenarios, and our goal remains to keep that rate as low as possible. Obviously the wage subsidy scheme has helped a lot, and what we want to make sure is that we continue to work on what support is needed to continue to keep people in employment. I've said many times before, the rate of unemployment will go up. What we're doing in New Zealand is mitigating that to the greatest extent possible. There are a number of results in different places in the world. In Australia, where there are schemes that are at least comparable to the wage subsidy coming in, you've got about 1 million Australians out of work at the moment due to coronavirus. So those numbers will become clear over time, and there'll be further forecasts in the budget next week.
You must have had modelling at this stage to suggest where it's heading as a percentage. I mean, you've said in the past we could be looking at the sort of the low double digits. Is that still your advice?
Well, like I say, the budget will come out next week and all the details of the Treasury's forecast will be in there. But I don't resolve from the fact that we will do everything we can to keep New Zealanders in work. But the reality of a 1 in 100 year economic shock is that we will see an increase in unemployment.
We need to be a bit more flexible in terms of the wage subsidy, because some businesses are facing so much uncertainty. The wage subsidy is going to run out in 4 weeks. They need to give people a month's notice if they're going to make them redundant. Do you just need to be a bit more flexible in terms of whether you'll extend that wage subsidy beyond the 12 weeks?
Well, as I've said a number of times, we're looking very closely at where further support will come from. Obviously, we've announced other initiatives since the wage subsidy scheme, such as the Small Business Loan Guarantee Scheme to help businesses meet their fixed costs.
The wage subsidy.
But we're working at the moment on how we can continue to provide support. Obviously, as we're noting by the statistics on economic activity, we're seeing more people go back to work. So we're seeing more people who may have taken the wage subsidy on, but now are building themselves back up. Equally, we're aware that for other sectors, they're going to continue to face significantly restricted activity. And so the work we're doing now is on how we can best provide that support. And we'll have more to say about that very soon.
Still rolling out extending the wage subsidy beyond the 12 weeks?
Well, what I'm saying is that the wage subsidy was a very open scheme, as you well know. And we've obviously got ourselves to a different place now in terms of the economy, where more businesses are back at work. The work that we're doing right now is to look at what kind of support best suits an environment where, as I said before, you've got a lot more economic activity. So the wage subsidy part 1 serves its purpose today and has served its purpose, and we will have more to say about what comes next in terms of our support in the coming days.
What message do you have to the thousands of New Zealanders who have lost their jobs in the last few weeks? And also, when we look at these figures today, it really shows that those under 30, Kiwis under 30 are going up in really high numbers in terms of unemployment.
Yeah, well, in terms of the second part of that question, it's one of the reasons I mentioned the number of returning New Zealanders who have actually taken up job seeker support, 10 times the number that we saw last year, and many of those will be people in that category of being under 30, the kinds of people who were overseas, perhaps on their own working holiday, who have returned here. My overall message remains that, you know, losing your job causes an enormous amount of distress, and we absolutely understand and feel that. We do have support in place for people when that happens. But our goal as a government is to make sure that we keep as many people in work as we possibly can, which is what we've done through the wage subsidy scheme, and that we work with those people to support them to retrain, to support them to find work into the future. And that's a huge part of the government's plan going forward from here. And again, I'll have a lot more to say about that next Thursday as well.
Dr. McElnay, can you give us some more details about this next phase of testing? Like, for example, can people in high exposure jobs like healthcare just go forward to a testing station now to get tested, even if they don't have symptoms?
The current stage of extra testing is being managed through the DHBs, and so that what we've asked the DHBs to do is to put in place specific testing for their area based on where either they've seen cases that there may have been a likelihood of high exposure, or areas where their testing is underrepresented of local communities. So it's the DHBs who are managing that at a local level, and they've got a variety of different plans. That's very appropriate because the district health boards have got different patterns of disease as well as different communities. So it's not as straightforward as just if you're a healthcare worker going and asking to be tested. But healthcare workers are one of the groups that we have asked the DHBs to particularly focus on, because we are seeing them as a group that, if there has been disease, have had a higher likelihood of being exposed. So we want that assurance.
We've heard that that some of the CBECs have gone back to using throat swabs and not nasal swabs. Is there a shortage of nasal swabs at the moment for testing?
I'm not aware that we've got any particular shortage of nasal swabs. Throat swabs have been used throughout the testing regime, but nasopharyngeal swabs are still the best swab. But if anyone's had a test, it's not necessarily the most pleasant and enjoyable of experiences, so a throat swab may be more appropriate in that situation.
So we'll just go to Joe.
The Prime Minister spoke yesterday about potentially phasing at level 2. In your mind, what are the particular problem areas at level 2 that would require that, and how realistic is having 100 strangers congregating in, say, a bar or a restaurant, given the jump that it would be from us having no strangers doing that currently?
Yeah, the point that the Prime Minister was making yesterday was that the move from level 3 to level 2 is a big move in terms of what opens up. We've got a real priority on making sure we do open up more activity in the economy, and so we've worked very hard to set up a system that will work that way. In terms of the kinds of issues that are important for making a move like this, you are highlighting one that's important. We know that it's mass gatherings where we've seen transmission of the virus previously, and so naturally that's one of the areas where we want to move carefully and cautiously. But that final decision about whether or not we do phase in level 2 or whether we move in one go like was outlined yesterday, that will be made by Cabinet on Monday.
So if we do go to level 2 though without the phasing, is it realistic for that mass gathering number to remain at 100 given it's nothing at the moment?
Yeah, but as I say, it is a big move. We'll take our advice from the public health officials about what is the best way to make that move. Clearly, a mass gathering of 100 people still requires physical distancing. And so it's not like you're cramming 100 people into a very small space under the rules that have been proposed. It does require all of the different parts of the public health guidelines to be seen together. But you are correct, mass gatherings is one of the issues that sits in the minds of people, because when we look at the kinds of clusters that have developed, they've often been based on that. Patrick.
Are you giving particular attention to or a special policy work around international education, hearing increasingly calls for international education to be opened up?
Yeah, yesterday I actually had a conversation about this with the Minister of Education, because while clearly at the moment the international education sector is not one that is able to operate, if New Zealand continues on the excellent path that we're on, it may be that in the future, into next year and beyond, actually we have a strategic advantage around the fact that people will look to a country like New Zealand and say that is a safe place for my children or for me to go and do further study. And so I know the Minister of Education is beginning conversations with the providers in the education sector who work in the international education area, along with our government agency, Education New Zealand, to start thinking about what that might look like. I want to reinforce that's not going to be happening anytime soon, because obviously the border restrictions stay in place. But for the sector, there is the potential in the future for this actually to be seen as a bit of an opportunity for them.
Happen in July or August?
No, I think that would be very unlikely given the border restrictions we've got, and the fact that the people at the other end, the countries that people are coming from, in many cases are still going through their own restrictions around COVID-19. But it is a situation that, where those organisations should be doing their planning so that they can get in as soon as they possibly can. I'll come to Bernard and then Tata.
Could you realistically open up to international education before a vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously one of the very significant issues that would need to be considered. Would that be possible? What kind of arrangements would be needed, such as quarantine? All of those things would have to be worked through before we could even consider bringing international students in. But it is an area where, at a time in the future, given the success that New Zealand has had, we would be a place that people would be interested in coming to. But I really want to reinforce that's not going to be happening in the immediate future. I'll just come to Tova and then Jen.
A couple up on behalf of other colleagues. Air New Zealand's preparing to take off again under level 2. What are your expectations for social distancing on flights?
Yeah, look, Air New Zealand understands the importance of physical distancing, and they will be doing that dependent on the type of aircraft that they had. I actually had a conversation with Air New Zealand during the week where we discussed this, when obviously on On the jets, it's pretty easy in a 3-seat combination to have somebody on the aisle and somebody on the window and a gap in the middle. On the ATRs, the smaller planes with the propellers that fly around much of the New Zealand network, it's a little bit more challenging, and they're working their way through that. But they understand the importance of physical distancing.
What's the plan to get the tourism industry up and running, and when will the government put that plan into action?
Oh, well, that work's been underway, and the Minister of Tourism, Kelvin Davis, has been working very closely with the industry over the last few weeks to develop that plan up. Well, no, they've been part of the development of it, and I understand they want it now. We've made some very positive announcements around what is possible under Level 2, and the Tourism Industry Association yesterday said that that will save many, many jobs in the sector. We're going to be working very closely with them around issues that range from, making sure that people can actually get to where they need to go to, through to making sure that the staff have got all of the equipment they need, all of the skills they need. There is a comprehensive plan that's been developed alongside the industry. Yes.
A couple of questions from colleagues as well. The Serious Fraud Office says it's inevitable that we will see people defrauding and taking advantage of things like the wage subsidy. Have you had any reports back on that happening yet?
Well, defrauding. We've certainly got our audit function well and truly up and running, and as a result of that, I believe the number was in the 30s of companies who've been asked to pay their money back. In addition to that, you've got a wide range of companies who are voluntarily returning the money that they got because, in large part, they didn't end up having the 30% decline in business that they thought they would. From our perspective, the wage subsidy scheme's worked exactly as we wanted it to do. It's kept people in work. And while around the fringes of it, there have been some people who may have misused it, overall it's done what it should. In terms of that specific point, I've stood on this stage and said that if people got the wage subsidy scheme under false pretences, it is fraud, and therefore we would expect it to be followed through.
On another topic, Minister. On another topic. So the South African flights, repatriation flights, we've had 6 this week and 5 have been cancelled. Can you give us some more information about why that's happened?
Yeah, so look, what had happened there was that there was an arrangement made with Qatar Airlines who were going to be doing those flights, and the first of those took off on the 7th of May, and I think it had half a dozen New Zealanders on board. Unfortunately, what's occurred is that Qatar have decided not to go through with the other flights, and so that's meant that I think around 142 New Zealanders were booked on those flights that Qatar have now cancelled. Our High Commission in Pretoria is working on this, and to use their words, they're urgently examining all of the possible options to be able to get New Zealanders home. This is the work that's going on all over the world at the moment with MFAT staff, is to try and work out the best way that we can get New Zealanders back. Sometimes those arrangements, through no fault of either ours or the people involved, fall over as they have here. We're working to make sure we can get them back.
Do you have any more information
on the budget? Can you just talk about the processes that have changed this year to avoid sort of a search hack situation like last year, and how confident are you that that won't happen again?
I've been given multiple reassurances by the Treasury that that will not happen again. They've undertaken a significant series of changes to the way that they manage online security, and in particular for documents like the budget. And so I won't go into all of those changes today, but they have given me a reassurance that there will be no reoccurrence of last year.
And just one for Dr. McElnay, do you have an update on the number of exemptions given on compassionate grounds?
I'm sorry, I don't have that update myself, Minister. I'm not sure if you were update on the exemptions on compassionate grounds. We can provide that information for you later.
I don't have that
I don't have
information
it.
with me either today. I'll just take Derek down the back.
Can I ask you about, because of the lag time, we were told like day 10, 11 of level 3 would indicate whether those easier restrictions might have led to more outbreaks. It looks as if that hasn't happened. Is that your interpretation, given how much time we've been in level 3 now?
Well, certainly the figures are very reassuring. We do think that we've got a very low level of disease in New Zealand. The occasional case that we're seeing, we can link back to existing either other cases or clusters. And that's very reassuring, but we still continue to keep a very close eye on the on the figures, and that is something that, as part of our strategy, we need to have going forward, is a very tough and rigorous surveillance system so that we can identify patterns of disease, because what we want to avoid is rapidly increasing numbers as we've seen elsewhere.
We'll just come over to Sam.
Can I just follow up on that, please?
Can
I just follow up on that?
One follow up, Derek. Yep.
When we had 0 cases, we were told that was a reflection of level 4. Can we now say that the current trend in the cases now are a reflection of level 3?
Well, it's a very good sign. We're not completely there in terms of having completed a full period for level 3, but I guess it's not giving us a signal that our numbers are increasing. So it's a very good sign.
Sam.
Your sports minister hat on. There's been some discussion with international sports leagues about whether they could potentially relocate to New Zealand if it was viable. I think specifically New Zealand Cricket had talked to the ECB about maybe moving the county cricket season here. Obviously that wouldn't be viable with the border restrictions in place. Would the government consider providing any sort of limited exemption in a scenario like that, as Australia has done with the Warriors? And do you know if any of those discussions have turned into anything?
I've seen an awful lot of expectation and speculation there. I've seen the English Premier League talked about. I've seen the NFL talked about. I think really what that represents is people really wanting to see sport back going and see it on their screens. As far as I'm aware, there have been no formal conversations about that at all. And I do think it's really important that we remember that one of the things that has enabled us to break the chain of transmission have been the restrictions that we have on our border. So anything like that would be, if at all possible, a long way into the future. We'll come back down to Thomas, who hasn't had one, and then we'll sweep back there.
Just a question from a colleague. There's a part of the Social Security Act that allows the government to grant emergency benefits to migrant workers. It hasn't happened yet. Why not? And is it being considered?
Yeah, the approach that we've taken there is to use the services that are available through the Ministry of Civil Defence and Emergency Management. Under the work that they've been doing, they've been able to provide assistance to a range of different people, including those who are from migrant backgrounds. It's been $30 million extra went into that just a couple of weeks ago. We're still considering what other options might be available to provide support for people, but that's the approach we've taken now. Ben, Joe, Tova, Jason.
On the budget, and I appreciate I can't ask what's in it, so I won't, but you've had a 100-year shock, you've had to put pet projects on ice, and now you've said that you won't be spending all the money the next year in the announcements you make on Thursday. So the question is, like, are you still proud of this budget, or is it a budget you've made with one hand behind your back, like a budget you've been forced into making?
Oh, I'm proud of all the two budgets I've delivered up to now, and I'll be proud of this one as well. I think it is really important to reiterate that in the period since the 17th of March, we've approved more than $22 billion worth of new expenditure. In an average budget, we tend to approve somewhere between $3 and $4 billion of new expenditure. The point to make here is that budget day will just be one day in a series, an ongoing rolling maul, if you will, of announcements and initiatives to be able to respond to COVID-19 and support New Zealanders' recovery and rebuild from it. So in that context, the budget is very different from budgets that we've seen in the past. It will give New Zealanders a sense of direction that we're going on. It will provide strong support to our public services, but it's part of a series of announcements and initiatives. Joe.
Just to come back to the mass gatherings, the point yesterday of the Prime Minister laying out what level 2 would look like was to give businesses, for example, some assurance. If that 100 number is not going to be it, it's going to be less, then surely some businesses, it won't be viable for them to bother to open their doors. Yeah. So what confidence can they actually have?
Level 2 is still level 2, and what we outlined yesterday is what the arrangements are for level 2 when it is fully in operation. What the Prime Minister was highlighting yesterday is that one possibility, and let's make sure we're clear on that, one possibility is that some aspects of the way level 2 works will be phased into operation. I'll give you a different example of that from the sports area. Technically speaking, when you look at the level 2 thing, people could be going out right away and playing competitive sport in leagues. They're not going to do that because they want to take time to make sure they get the public health and the safety around that activity right. So actually, level 2 coming in will naturally phase in for people because they will take their time to get used to the rules. Prime Minister is simply indicating it may be that we may get some advice that says to us that we need to specifically phase in some elements. We'll make those decisions on Monday. Jackson.
Just a follow on that.
If that's for Joe, Jackson.
What's the advice regarding cash transactions at level 2? Should cash be avoided?
Oh, I think in general we've been encouraging people to use contactless payments. That's something that a lot of New Zealanders are getting used to, but I'm sure that cash will return to us. And as far as I'm aware, in level 2.
It's just simply not possible at a lot of
That's
stores.
right. And so cash payments no doubt will resume, but obviously people will be taking significant care for those. Back to Jess.
Just following up on that South African flight, do you have any information on why those Qatar flights were cancelled, and also what assurances can you give to people stuck in South Africa?
I actually cannot give any further advice on why, and I'm not sure even if our officials exactly know the answer to that. But Qatar is obviously a private company, and it will do what it can. What I have been told is they are urgently re-examining what can happen. We want to do everything we can to make sure that we return those New Zealanders here. We had an arrangement. Unfortunately, the airline's not flying those flights anymore, and we'll do everything in our power to bring those people back.
Colleagues, thank you very much. Can you confirm that you and Treasury do not have the figures showing how much banks have loaned under the Business Finance Guarantee Scheme, and why do you not have, if not, why don't you have those figures when you've been getting frequent updates on the wage subsidy?
I don't have those figures. I can't speak for the Treasury and every staff member at the Treasury. The business loan scheme, Business Finance Guarantee Scheme, been operating in full for a few weeks now. We've made some changes to it last week, and so obviously we're going to see what the impact of those is over time. But as soon as I've got that information, I'd be happy to share it with people.
For a colleague, sorry, an Emirates flight left out of Christchurch yesterday with 40 tonnes of freight. How important is it for the economy that we're able to export at a time like this?
Vitally important for the New Zealand economy that our exports keep going. And the good news is that actually the volumes and value of export has been keeping up with where we've been over the last couple of years. We've seen... Janae wasn't interested in that answer. The volumes of exports that we've seen in areas like apples and kiwi fruit, meat and dairy have been going really, really well. And part of our aviation support package was $330 million to make sure we continue to have air cargo capacity. I think it is one of the really, really positive things we've done in partnership with business to keep the economy moving. Benedict.
In February, the Ministry of Social Development gave out 45,000 food grants to Māori. In April, it was 147,000 food grants to Māori. What's going on there, and how concerning is that?
Well, I mean, what we're seeing is a reflection of the fact that COVID-19 has had a big impact in New Zealand, and that particularly those who are in vulnerable populations, some people who are on low incomes, are affected when we have a pandemic. What that shows is that the system can deliver the support that it needs to, but also what it highlights is the importance of us making sure that we get people back to work as soon as we possibly can, and that we continue to work on what support we can provide to households in addition to what's normally available. Janae.
Thank you. How open are you at this point to enabling Treasury and the Reserve Bank to work more closely together by allowing the Reserve Bank to buy bonds directly from Treasury as opposed to the secondary market?
Yeah, at this point in time, we don't see the need for that. The arrangement that we've got with the Reserve Bank enables them to support the liquidity of our financial system. The bond markets continue to operate well, and they are intervening at what I believe is the appropriate point. Both the Reserve Bank Governor and myself have said, never say never on the direct purchase, but for now, there is no need for that. The financial system in New Zealand is holding up very well, actually.
I just have a second question. And
is it about exports, Jenna?
Sorry, no. I do care about exports, though. Just in terms of the public sector, what role do you think the public sector will have in terms of employing more people, possibly people who have lost their jobs in the private sector?
Well, the public sector continues to play a very important role in our recovery, and there are some areas where we are needing to increase the number of people working there, for example, within the Ministry of Social Development, both to support people in terms of income, but also in finding new work. So there will be opportunities there. But ultimately in the New Zealand economy, we need a robust and strong private sector that's employing more people to work alongside the public sector. So while there'll be some opportunities, our big focus here is actually to grow jobs in the private sector.
You said, just one on behalf of me and then one on behalf of a colleague, you said that the wage subsidy was part one, and I'm just looking at that, obviously indicates to me that there'll be a part two. Are you saying that that's going to be likely to be a lot more targeted than the wage subsidy scheme?
Yeah, the point I was making there was that we understand that there will continue to be a role for the government in supporting people through this crisis. We have, with the wage subsidy scheme, a very open scheme, deliberately designed that way to make sure people got money in their pockets and stayed attached to their jobs. As more businesses and workers go back to work, the need for such a broad scheme changes, and we move more towards what we can do to provide more targeted support. That's the piece of work we're on now.
And just on behalf of a colleague, what is the New Zealand government's official position on Taiwan being an observer to the WHO?
Well, as indicated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, New Zealand thinks that Taiwan has something to offer at the WHO right at the moment. Clearly they were a country that has employed a number of quite successful methods for dealing with the virus. They've had a number of their epidemiologists and public health experts who've provided a great deal of advice that many countries have benefited from. They have been an observer at the WHO in the past, and I think in this time of the post-COVID-19 crisis, there's room for them to be there again.
You say there's room for them. Prime Minister, Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters was very explicit when he said that his position, he said his personal position a few days ago, then yesterday he said it was the government's position that they should be on the WHO. Can we just have a definitive yes or no as to the government's position?
As I said, we think as an observer at the WHO, Taiwan has a lot to offer.
Yeah, but that's not actually saying if you think that they should be on. You're saying that they...
I think you're just playing with words with respect, Jason.
So have ministers' salaries been docked yet?
We are in the process of the legislation being finalised that will allow for that, and so once that's done, the actual transaction will take place. But the commitment to make sure that we take that 20% cut for 6 months absolutely remains.
I'll just ask a follow-up question for Dr. McElnay as well. When you were talking before about the 12,000 tests, or 12,535 we can do each day, how much more community testing will you be doing to try and take advantage of that? And can you be specific about where that is expected?
At the moment, we have two types of testing. We've got testing for people who are symptomatic, and we have a very broad definition for what meets the criteria for that testing. That will continue using symptomatic testing. What we're doing as an addition at the moment, in order to garner as much information about the level of disease in the community, is we're rolling out through the DHBs asymptomatic testing, so actually targeting people who don't have symptoms. It's the asymptomatic testing that we will be reviewing whether we need to keep doing that, but we need to keep our testing levels high, however we do it, so that we're gaining as much information as possible about cases in the community.
So where's that happening?
So across New Zealand, in different places, they're doing different targeted approaches, but all the DHBs are doing symptomatic testing, and most of the DHBs are doing asymptomatic testing, reaching out to communities who don't have any symptoms. It's the second part. Going forward, when we're in level 2, we'll need to revise how we actually do that and what our specific advice is.
Thomas.
Minister, you just said that Taiwan was a country that had been handling this quite well. Is New Zealand's position on the status of Taiwan evolving?
No, it's not. Taiwan as an economy and an island of very well-educated, well-informed people, particularly at the highest levels on epidemiology, has the opportunity to be able to contribute a lot by being an observer at the WHO. There is no change and no shift in New Zealand's position.
Can I just ask about, in terms of putting together the budget, sort of a follow-up to Janae's question, is it helpful to be communicating with the Reserve Bank, though, just so that there is some indication of the appetite for New Zealand government bonds.
We're talking very regularly with the Reserve Bank, and while we continue to respect both the operational independence of the bank and the government's role in terms of managing fiscal policy, my observation of the last couple of months is that we have had more communication between the Reserve Bank and the government than I have ever seen before. We're working very, very closely together, and so I don't think there's any gap there that would be preventing us from taking that action if that's what we decided to do. I'll take Bernard and Jackson, and then one more over here.
On the issue of the Reserve Bank buying in the secondary market versus directly from the government, how much of a concern is it that the Reserve Bank is effectively pumping money into financial markets, which are pumping up the value of assets, including stocks, when a direct purchase of bonds from the government would be much more likely to see all of that money go into the hands of where the government thinks it should be, and you can't see the Reserve Bank being accused of doing QE for the rich.
Yeah, look, I think there are a number of different views around what is the best way to go about ensuring that we've got the liquidity we need in our system. There are disciplines that are associated with being in the secondary market that mean that that we are contributing to the functioning of the financial system. I think a move to direct purchasing in many ways would be, from our point of view, saying that that financial system is somehow not coping. It actually is, and actually us being a part of it makes sure that it's strengthened. Jackson.
Back on Taiwan, did the Foreign Minister overstep the mark yesterday when he told the Chinese ambassador to listen to her master? Was it appropriate for Winston Peters to say that?
Well, Mr. Peters is responsible for his words as Foreign Minister. What I can say is that New Zealand continues to strongly value the relationship we have with China. It's a relationship with a lot of depth. It's a relationship where we have come over time to rely on one another and support one another. Nothing has changed about that at all.
Minister, did you read the paper authored by former Labor Finance Minister Roger Douglas this week? And if so, what did you make of it?
No.
Minister, move into alert level 3 next week. Could domestic tourism potentially be phased in until after Queen's birthday weekend, the beginning of June?
Oh, as I said, we haven't made those decisions about whether or not things would be phased in at this point. That would be something we would make on Monday. But we are working alongside the tourism industry to get that going as soon as possible, and I'm confident we'll be able to do that.
What are you most looking forward to about level 2?
I'm looking forward to seeing my grandchildren. And on that happy note, have a good weekend. Of course I am. I'm obviously too young and good looking to be a grandfather.